Hey guys, Doyle again. Welcome back to another episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck Profiles. We haven't had one of these in a while, and honestly, I've been doing some tweaking and some testing and some gameplay in some local tournaments, and I finally have some awesome results to share with you guys. Today, I'm coming at you with a top 8 Vanquish Soul deck profile. This is such a super cool deck, and we're working towards building a couple of cool things with it. Not only a couple different ways to play, because there are combo versions, there are control versions, they're inherently very interesting, dynamic, and flexible deck, which is really cool. But we're also working towards building out a max rarity version of it. So you may see a couple of different rarities of cards in the video today. I know some people like that, some people don't, but be sure to keep an eye out. Maybe in the future we'll see what progress we can make with this deck and see what it looks like. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right in, starting off with the main deck. And we are on 40 cards. Getting into our primary Vanquish Soul engine. We are starting out with 3 copies of Vanquish Soul Raisin. This is your Stratos for the deck. Absolutely incredible main deck starter monster. So how this guy works, this is your 1 card starter for everything. We play a lot of different tools to search him. So on summon, he's a Stratos for your deck. You normal summon, search any Vanquish Soul monster, which is how you get access to your tri-types of Fire, Dark, and Earth, which is a requirement to trigger each of the bullet effects for the main deck monsters. And, as a quick effect, during either player's turn, he can either make himself immune to destruction by card effects, by revealing a fire, or he can pop all monsters in the column, revealing a fire and dark. Super, super great monster, and absolutely the flagship best card of the deck. And alongside it, we are playing triple copies of Vanquish Soul Dr. Madlove. So this is your spell trap searcher for the deck. So your standard line of play, normal Raisin, search Madlove, link Raisin off for Rock of the Vanquisher, special Madlove, and get into one of your spell traps, which we'll get into later, but just to note that this deck has access to some really, really disruptive interaction through its spell trap tools. So Madlove is your searcher for these. She's a dark monster and actually has 2 really cool effects for her bullets that come up in weird fringe interactions. Surprisingly, one of them is just to reveal a dark monster and reduce a monster's attack and defense by 500. And the other is to compulse the monster with the lowest defense on the field. She actually has a very high defense herself. She's 2,000. And funnily enough, I actually ran into that over the tournament this weekend when my opponent couldn't clear her because she was just in defense, and their strongest monster was a 2k beater under skill drain, which we'll get into shortly. But these are absolutely kind of your bread and butter starter combo cards. Alongside that, we are playing 2 copies of Vanquish Soul Heavy Borger. So Borger has 2 great effects, but most notably, this is actually the first card that we're playing in the mainline Vanquish Soul engine that allows you to target a Vanquish Soul monster other than itself on your side of the field, bounce it back to hand, and then special summon itself. So really strong ability to kind of jump between monsters during the main phase. As well, the 2 great effects are 1, reveal a darkened hand. During either player's turn, you can draw a card, which is really nice because if you get this out on your turn, and maybe you tagged it out for Madlove, for example, you can reveal the Madlove, draw a card, and then as soon as it passes over to your opponent's turn, you reveal Madlove in draw phase and get to draw again. So you can see more hand traps, more board breakers, more starters, anything you possibly could want. As well, because of the way its tag out effects works as a quick effect during the main phase, you can use it on your opponent's turn to help resolve certain effects like Raisin, for example, by searching and dodging, say, Imperm, or if you're trying to search with Madlove and your opponent tries to Effect Veiler, you can dodge that as well. So any targeted interruption for other cards of your archetype, you can use Borger to kind of dodge those effects, which is super awesome. So that's what we've got for multiple copies of our primary engine monsters. We're also on a number of one-ofs. We have the one of Vanquish Soul Pantera, one of Vanquish Soul Pluton HG, and the one of Boss Monster, Vanquish Soul, Caesar, Valius. So these cards are all good in their own merit, but in my opinion, they're not really great in more than single copies. So Pantera can make herself immune to destruction by battle, and also clear spell traps in the same column as her. In a way, she's basically a starter extender because she's also a free special summon from hand while you control no monsters in the main monster zone. And I really want to be clear on that because this is actually a ruling that's come up a couple of times. Both Pluton and Pantera require you to have no monsters in the main monster zone or to only control Vanquish Soul monsters. This is really important because we had a few people now say, hey, you have Rock of the Vanquisher in your extra monster zone, which doesn't count as a Vanquish Soul monster. So, you know, kudos on the reading there. But unfortunately, Rock isn't in the main monster zone. It's in the extra monster zone. So very important clarification there. But Pantera as a extender is okay. Her effects have some utility, certainly, in like control matchups and all of that. But at a fundamental level, the problem with the Earth monsters in this deck is that you're playing Fires, Darks, and Earths, and the Earths all have to reveal other Earths for their effects. And inevitably, the way the deck breaks down, you're just not naturally going to be playing as many Earth monsters as you are Darks and Fires. We all know how great Darks are as an archetype and how much support they have. Same with Fire. You've got really great hand traps and stuff, which we'll get to soon. But ultimately, basically when it comes down to it, whenever you're playing an Earth monster, what that translates to usually is you have one less Earth monster in hand, basically, to use for those effects. Obviously, you may ask, well, then why aren't we playing more of these? And it's because, realistically, Pantera doesn't do much on her own, and drawing multiple Caesars, that's actually one thing we'll see that we tried to control with this deck between only playing the 2 Borger and the 1 Caesar. We're actually trying really hard not to brick off the boss monsters because it's very, very possible and easy to draw into multiples of these cards without a starter and basically having a hand that you can't physically play a single card out of. So we tried to minimize that and improve some of the consistency with this one, and we'll see more about that a little bit later. So that's kind of the rundown with the Earth monsters. I do think these cards are all great, like I said, in their own merit. Pluton HG is kind of an interesting one as well. It's basically there just to be an extra body that keeps us alive. This is actually the only one that can special summon itself from the hand as a quick effect during any phase of the opponent's turn. And believe it or not, that frequently comes up. So for example, your opponent may clear your monsters with destruction, which in Vanquish Soul, we don't usually put up a huge board. More often than not, we set up, 1 or 2 points of interaction that we're actually just trying to use to be able to get past our opponent's turn and survive, so we can kind of rebuild with all of our extra resources. Set up our Borger, Caesar, tag out interaction, that kind of thing. But when your opponent goes to battle phase, one thing they're often not expecting is for you to special summon a monster that has 3,000 defense, which comes up quite a lot. This card honestly saved me and won me many games at this point, weird as it is, because no one's playing around a surprise 3k monster when they, clear your board and they go to attack with their monsters that have already used their effects, and you just say, hey, here's my guy, special summon, are you still going to attack? And they go, well, yeah, I'll try, and then you change its stat in damage step, even if they try to push through. Honestly, this card has more uses than you'd think. And I guess obviously the highlights of it are the fact that it is a fire monster, which is nice because we can use it for small world bridges, we can use it to help trigger things like Raisin's effect, Borger's secondary burn effect, and of course Caesar's untargeted pop, which is amazing. So lastly, Caesar, of course, just super quick on him. This is a fantastic boss monster, 3k beater that can make himself unaffected by opponent's activated effects, so it can become a towers, and or alternatively, untargeted pop by revealing one of each of your tri-types of fire, dark, and earth. Absolutely fantastic monster. This card is incredible. Oftentimes, even if you do hold the pop and your opponent tries to destroy it or use some interaction, get rid of it, you almost always get off this really disruptive form of destruction unless you get, outright negated, because not having to declare that target, it really opens you up to using, different options for what you're actually trying to destroy. Like, it might not be the most obvious big boss monster or big problematic creature on the board. It might be a grind game spell trap they have, or a really useful field spell that's kind of keeping their engine going. You can really, really play around with the destruction on Caesar and use it in a lot of advantageous situations. And conversely, a lot of decks just don't have outs to unaffected beater monsters, and depending on your matchups, like, weirdly enough, this card is actually, that's one thing I didn't use as much as I probably should have over the weekend. Caesar actually has a really good matchup against Purely. That deck doesn't really use a lot of main deck like Kaiju tools or anything like that. So if they can't put a monster on the field that specifically has more than 3k attack, which oftentimes the best they can do for that is Zeus, if Caesar's unaffected and can't have his stats reduced. So yeah, you might have to run into situations there where you have to go for a crash with a Zeus, and obviously you're not going to get one of those unless you go through the battle phase. So Caesar just has such good value. Honestly, if I were going to update my ratios for the monsters here, I would consider maybe playing the second Caesar. I tried using another Pantera, and I found that basically what ended up happening is if you ran into opening hands where this was your only Vanquish Soul access, you just kind of got into this really almost kind of weak loop of just summoning Rock and adding it back and using it as pretty much a stall tool to just try to survive battle and maybe control back row, but it didn't have a lot of value. But there is some value in opening Caesar in hand, especially if you do get access into Raisin and the rest of your playline, because that saves you a search, right? So there is some good value there for sure. With that, that is everything for the main Vanquish Soul engine. Over to the hand trap side of things. So we are, of course, playing triple copies of Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. We're also playing 3 copies of Kurikara Div Incarnate, 2 copies of Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion. And lastly, for our hand trap / disruption style cards, we are playing 2 copies of Bestial Magnamut and the 1 copy of Bestial Druisworm to go along with it. So just a quick overview of this. I mean, a lot of these are just generically good hand trap and obviously Kurikara board breaker style tools. Ash has universal applicability. In this deck, it does double duty as a fire monster and a fantastic card to draw into off of our Borger draws every turn. Same as Ghost Spell, same as the Bestials. These are just attributes, right? We got the fire, we got the earth, and we got the darks to just draw into. They set us up with extra interaction by themselves on our opponent's turn. And they also pull that double duty of being able to help us more consistently trigger the effects of our main Vanquish Soul monsters. Super quick, Kurikara. I have to talk about this card. This card is absolutely phenomenal. It has won me more games than I can count. I cannot believe how strong Kurikara's effect is. That Kaiju style effect that does not activate, very important. To just wipe your opponent's board. I've resolved this against Kashtira so many times at this point. You bait out other effects with your monsters, your spells, anything else, and then you just wipe their board, hit for a ton of damage, pass to end phase, and your monster reborning, their Omni Negates, their Barones, their really cool tools like that, and just setting yourself up for a really great position for follow-ups. So I actually did that a number of times, and over the tournament on the weekend, I resolved Kurikara against a Sword Soul player, and they used all their cards, they were on top deck mode, I wiped their board, cleared their last monster in battle, went to end phase and monster reborn their Barone, and Sword Soul on top deck mode against an Omni Negate, not a great place to be. So absolutely incredible card. Honestly, I love main decking this card. I think this is a phenomenal card in this format, and I'm Honestly, kind of surprised there isn't more of it, but I do think that a Vanquish Soul deck, especially where this is a fire monster, you know, for example, an alternative to a card like this, if you're just trying to break boards, going second maybe, right, might be something like Evenly Matched, for example. But again, we get a lot of value out of the attributes. We get a lot of value out of the effect. We can use this card for small world bridges, funnily enough. It comes up sometimes, so this card is great. So super quick, over to Ghost Bell. So, interestingly enough, I think this is simultaneously a card that is probably one of the most underrated hand traps in the format right now, and even with that, I actually don't think this card is super great. And there's a key distinction between Ghost Bell and Ash Blossom. So Ash Blossom negates effect. That's part of the reason why it's such a good card. It's part of the reason why it plays around things like Branded Lost, and why it's such a big deal to negate Branded Fusion with Ash is because it negates effect. It doesn't negate activation, so they can't just try to activate it again. Ash is just an amazing card, and because it has such a broad effect, and because it negates effects, not activations. Unfortunately, Ghost Bell does suffer from that. So Ghost Bell only negates activations of cards with these graveyard-related effects. And sadly, what that means in practical play is you do run into weird fringe situations where you negate a card with Ghost Bell, and then they just have that card again, and they use it again because it was a once per turn activation, and you negated the activation, so the card never activated. So a little bit of cost to value there. Thankfully, we do get a little more value out of this card in our deck anyway, because Ghost Bell is an Earth. And it's funny, it's actually one of the cards that I most frequently sided out over the weekend, and it is what it is. It didn't do a lot for me. I know it's a great card. I know that I would love to be running it at 3. If it did negate effects, I absolutely would run it at 3 because we need more Earth monsters in this deck for sure. So just something to keep in mind. And finally, we have the Bestials. So, I gotta talk about these cards. These cards pulled more than their weight in gold during the tournament over the weekend. I was obviously main decking these cards, and I actually ran into a Tearlaments player in my matchup, so got a lot of value out of running these cards. Druid's Worm as a one-of, for whatever reason, continues to be glued to my opening hand, but it felt pretty good this time around. So what is there to talk about with these cards? Well, one of the coolest interactions, obviously, with Bestial Magnamut, during the end phase, when you special summon it by banishing a card from the graveyard, it triggers, and during the end phase you get to search a dragon. So normally you are searching your Druid's Worm for a follow-up banish and follow-up removal, but depending on your hand, sometimes you can also search Caesar Valius because it is a dragon monster, and also an earth monster, which can be very, very relevant to maintain in hand, even if you're not planning on using his bounce and his pop or unaffected effects, because sometimes you just need to keep an earth monster in the hand for your effects. So really, really cool interactions with these cards. On the note for the Tearlaments matchup, actually, again, I got a ton of value out of these cards. Was able to stop some of those fusions from happening, stop some of their effects from going off, and some of the value that they were generating from getting carried away. And ultimately, actually ended up drawing that one because I forgot to use a Borger Burn right before time, but and I went for a draw instead. But honestly, it felt more like a win in spirit. So really happy with these ratios overall. Honestly, the funniest part of all of this is I really wish Skullmeister was an Earth monster, because if it was, I would absolutely be main decking 3 copies of Skullmeister over Ghost Bell for this deck, just because it's a universal graveyard effect applicability, and if the attribute lined up, it would be phenomenal for this. But for now, we're playing with what we got. I may, like I said, may work on some adjustments for the Earth monster ratios. I'd love to maybe see a second Caesar and see how that works out. But On the note for Earth monsters, and on the note for rounding out our monster list, we have 2 copies of Kashtir Fenrir, 1 copy of Dogoran the Mad Flame Kaiju, and 1 copy of the Therian King Regulus. And this is kind of where some of our leftover attributes ended up. First note, only playing the 2 Fenrir. I actually find this card bricks a lot when you play it at 3 in the hand. And it is a fantastic card to open, I will give it that. It feels so good special summoning this card. You get a big body, you get an interaction on the field for that banish face down, and most importantly, its search effect gets you a replacement copy of itself, which normally that's just a follow-up play, but in this deck it's keeping an Earth monster in hand, which feels really, really nice. Did find, like I said, that it bricks a lot when you play at 3. I do not want to open multiple copies of this card, and minimizing the possibility of that happening, honestly, was kind of what I went with for this weekend. Also, we have Dogoran, the Mad Flame Kaiju. So this card actually was also kind of served a similar purpose as Kurikara. Basically, what you were trying to do was clear out those problematic boss monsters, clear the board, set up your plays, and it served the purpose. It's also a great small world bridge target because it's fire, it's got 3k attack, it's got huge levels. It matches up really nicely with some of the stats that we play around with in this deck. So a great card overall. I do think moving forward that attribute-wise, this might be one I would change or even potentially cut in place of our second copy of Caesar. Just because, honestly, the Kurikaras pulled a ton of weight, and they really do, in a lot of ways, feel like just better kaijus. It's also still a fire, it's still, usable for the similar tools, so I'm thinking that might be one of the changes that we come up with. And lastly, Therian King Regulus. So I'll be getting into this card a little bit more when we get over to the extra deck. This card's really cool. It's actually part of a double material Zeus and Omni Negate setup line that only requires 2 level 4 monsters to set up, which in this deck is exceptionally easy. Really cool combo. I'll show it quickly when we get to the end. But for now, that's actually going to be it for the monsters in the main deck. So on to the archetype spells. So we have the triple copies of Stake Your Soul, the 1 copy of Vanquish Soul Continue, and the 1 copy of Vanquish Soul Dust Devil. So super quick about these cards. Stake Your Soul, absolutely fantastic card for this deck. Allows you to reveal a monster in hand and special summon a Vanquish Soul monster from your deck with the same attribute as the one you revealed. Great card, synergizes excellently with our hand trap lineup. We have tons of fire monsters to reveal to summon Raisin. We have Ash, Kurikara, Dogoran, and it really helps you kind of stabilize hands that maybe are missing some of your pieces, so you can get into some of the other monsters. If you already have Raisin or access to it, you can use this to kind of extend those hands, and it makes bad hands good, it makes good hands better, and it makes great hands a little bit over the top with how much access to all of your tools, all your consistency, your resource engine, your interactions, your disruptions. Really, really awesome card, and easily probably the best card in the deck. Over to Vanquish Soul Continue, very interesting card here. So this one, pay 500 life points, and you can either add a Vanquish Soul monster from your grave back to your hand, or special summon it from the grave to your side of the field in defense position. It is a quick play, which is really notable because you can use it to set up interaction, disruption, or searches on your opponent's turn in phases that aren't the main phase. So this helps you play around maybe, certain hand trap effects. It helps you play around the fact that a lot of your cards do limit you to interactions in the main phase. Just really great utility tool, and honestly, I have seen lists playing this at 2. I chose not to for this weekend, but I do think that there is some merit to that, and maybe we'll consider trying it out in future hands. Lastly, we have Vanquish Soul Dust Devil. This card is incredible. So how this card works, it's a quick play spell. You can target one of your Vanquish Soul monsters, change its battle position, and then you untargeted Book of Moon any number of monsters on your opponent's side of the field up to the number of Vanquish Soul monsters with different names you control. So a couple nuances with this. Number one, as we said earlier, Rock of the Vanquisher sadly does not count towards the Vanquish Soul names, which is a real shame because I do think that that would kind of push this card over the top a little bit. But in the meantime, you're almost always getting access to this card in your opening hand, and you're almost always setting up minimum one, most of the time double Book of Moon through this card. So your opponent summons a monster, summon their starter. If they're playing Kashtira, they special summon their Fenrir, their Unicorn. You immediately activate this Book of Moon, the card face down, and oftentimes that can even be an FTK for decks like Kashtira, where if they don't have Birth or some kind of immediate extender on hand, they might be in trouble because they can't summon any other monsters to their side of the field. So this card is fantastic. I got a ton of value out of this card over the weekend. And honestly, between this and the other Vanquish Soul trap as well, Vanquish Soul Trinity Burst, which I'm not playing today, but which I did consider, I think we may be updating our spell trap list here because I was looking at that card and it does seem nice to potentially be able to compulse as well. Like, this deck has access to crazy interactions. Trinity Burst lets you compulse and it's up to 3 whole columns of the board instead of just monsters or back row. It hits all of them, which is pretty incredible, much like how incredible this card is to untargeted Book of Moon. It's a fantastic disruption. So we have access to some really strong tools here. I was very happy with how these cards performed over the weekend. We may, honestly, like I said, we may just add more in the future. So really, really happy for that. And lastly, we have our consistency card. So we're playing 2 copies of Small World, 1 copy of Reinforcement of the Army, 1 copy of Infernoble Arms Durandal, 1 copy of Pot of Prosperity, and 1 copy of Triple Tactics Talent. So these are all cards just to help you get access to your Raisin, your starters, fix your hands, adjust what you need. Rhoda obviously needs no explanation. Fantastic card. I actually top decked this card over the weekend, so you know, we're got nothing to say about that. A Searcher for Raisin with no cost and no setup. That's a card that you always play 100% of the time in this deck. One thing I will just quickly talk about here on our ratios for Small World and Pot of Prosperity. I actually don't own more than this 1 Pot of Prosperity. Otherwise, I probably would have been playing more over the weekend. Small World is a fantastic card in this deck. This deck is built to run on Small World because pretty much any card in this deck gets you into any other card of the deck. They all have different types, different stats, different levels. So it's a really great searcher card. With that being said, because Small World is a hard once per turn, I was actually thinking about this in some deck building stuff after the fact, and I had already previously cut this from 3, as you might imagine. We put in our Pot of Prosperity. I would honestly probably cut Small World down to a single copy. Again, you don't like going -1 to use it because you have to banish a monster in your hand to go search for your deck for any other card. It's not the worst in this deck because obviously when you do get the 1 card you need, you can set up your whole engine and you can kind of recoup your losses through your advantage engine. But you never ever want to see 2 of these cards. Again, that's part of the reason why I cut it down from 3 to 2 initially, and I'm thinking more and more about it. I'm like, you know what, why even play the chance? It's a card that we do go inherently minus off of. It's a great card to see. I would never ever even want to have the minutest chance to draw 2 of them, so we probably would cut that down to 1. And honestly, on the replacements, you may think I'm going to say Pot of Prosperity for that. I was actually thinking we may look at adding in more copies of Infernoble Arms Durandal. This card pulled its weight so much over the weekend. I have used this card in this deck since it came out and since I first built it, and I have never been negated on this card. I don't know why people have like this, I almost want to call it a psychological barrier around this card, because it reads, equip to a monster, and then to use its effect, you search Raisin from deck, and it destroys itself. And everybody reads that and goes, oh, well, it's basically just a searcher that gets rid of itself, so I'm not, you know, I don't need to stop it. Well, in this deck, getting Raisin into rotation is the most important part of your deck. If you summon Raisin and it gets impermed, effect veilered, ashed, whatever, and you don't have a card to dodge it or card to follow up, you can still just make Rock, add Raisin back to hand, and have that as your setup for the following turn. Like, you can still keep your engine going as long as you have Raisin in rotation. And this card gets us there, and it got me there a ton of times over the weekend, so great card. Last card, the one-of Triple Tactics Talent. I love playing this card as a one-of in basically any deck. It just has such universal applicability. It's almost like an Ash Blossom in a certain sense. It just helps you play through Disruption. We did use it over the weekend, unfortunately got punished on it. We got negated by an effect veiler, an opponent hadn't used Ash. I did get greedy and go for the draw too and got ashed on that. So it didn't show the value. Honestly, it gave me a learning experience, which is if we're ever in that situation in the future, if our opponent's hand looping themselves down a card to interrupt us on our first turn, why don't we bring them down from 4 to 3 cards, right? And get, that hand information knowledge and go that route if they haven't used Ash on us yet. So we'll keep that in mind for the future. I do love Triple Tactics. I think it's a great card, and I absolutely do want to keep it in as a singleton because, honestly, drawing it and resolving it just feels super great. So that's it for our spell lineup as a whole. We are down to the last 3 cards of the deck, which definitely requires some introduction. 3 copies of Skill Drain. So this deck plays with Skill Drain in a very interesting way. So Konami went out of its way to make abundantly clear how Skill Drain works and how it negates the effects of monsters on the field by explicitly stating in the card text, Skill Drain negates all effects of monsters face up on the field while they are face up on the field. Meaning that if any of your effects are resolving and the position of the monster whose effects you are trying to resolve is not explicitly face up on the field, those effects will still resolve. Case in point with how this deck works, so normal playline, obviously we normal summon our Raisin, maybe we already have Borger in hand as part of our setup, which feels super good if we're already there, maybe we search Caesar Valius. These 3 cards play fantastically with Skill Drain. So how it works is you go through your normal playline your first turn, you set your Skill Drain, and then on your opponent's turn at any time you want, maybe you get things kicked off by using your Rock effect, a special Raisin from your hand, or go to use Raisin Search, opponent maybe tries to use some kind of monster effect on their side of the field, you flip Skill Drain. Opponent doesn't have a response to that, you chain Borger targeting your Raisin. So you get your search because Borger will resolve, adding Raisin back to your hand and tagging out with itself onto the field. Raisin, now in the hand, will successfully resolve because it's not a monster face up on the field at that point. So, from that point, you can do the same thing using your Caesar Valius in hand. So activate Borger effect to reveal a dark, which presumably you would have drawn off of your Raisin Search. You get your access to your Mad Love, you reveal your dark monster, and you try to draw. Opponent has no response, you chain Caesar Valius, bounce the Borger back to hand, and because on resolution Borger is in your hand, Skill Drain will not affect it, so you still get your draw. Very cool little compact resource engine that this deck plays with really well with Skill Drain. A lot of decks don't have a way to deal with Skill Drain. That's actually part of the reason I'm playing this with my local meta. We got some Fluanderies players, got some purely unless basically your opponents have to be main decking pretty much just basic spell trap removal, or otherwise a lot of decks just don't have a way to deal with this. Obviously the one exception to that rule that's big right now is Labyrinth, but we have a lot of tools. We have untargeted pops, we have back row clears. We've got a lot of ways to kind of play around with that deck, and we have a lot of tools for it in the side deck as well. So that's going to be it for the main deck. Like we said, 40 cards, only playing those 3 traps. Pretty happy with it overall, maybe just a few tweaking changes, but otherwise feel really good about the main deck. Now over to the side deck. We are playing triple copies of Rock of the Vanquisher. So this is the engine card for the deck. How it works is any of your Vanquish Soul monsters can link 1 into this guy, and basically it lets you recycle your Vanquish Soul resources from the graveyard by adding them back to hand, or it lets you special summon them from hand to your field. That is a quick effect. It's only during the main phase, but you can do it on either player's turn, and this is honestly one of the best parts about the deck is that it just keeps this chain of resource accumulation going. I've won games playing this deck at my locals where I've ended the game with 7 or even 8 cards in hand on my opponent's turn because we just keep amassing that advantage. So really great card. It does have a bit of an interesting built-in protection effect because it has 0 attack, so it is quite a vulnerable monster to leave on the field. However, you can't attack it if there is another Vanquish Soul in the field. In fact, you have to attack the Vanquish Soul monster with the highest attack stat. So usually that's your Borger, that's your Caesar, and none of your other monsters can be targeted for attacks, period. It's kind of an interesting, almost floodgate style effect that protects itself and honestly protects your other cards too. So overall, this card is fantastic and pretty much the heart and soul of the extra deck. Honestly, anything past this card is really up to your preference if you're interested in trying out this deck, but you cannot forego any of these. You gotta keep rocking. Rock is amazing. Now, over to the Link Removal Package. We have some interesting toolbox cards here. We've got Nightmare Cerberus, Nightmare Phoenix, Security Dragon, and Sky Striker Ace Azalea. So, the purpose of these cards, like I said, this is just kind of your resources, your toolbox cards to kind of help remove cards. So you can remove special summon monsters with Cerberus, you can remove back row with Phoenix, great card, again, for matchups like Labyrinth. Security Dragon, this is a way to bounce your Kaijus. If you are playing main deck Kaijus like Dogoran, this is a great way to get rid of an opponent's problematic monster, link into this, bounce that Kaiju back to hand, and potentially get rid of another, or otherwise keep an attribute in hand. So pretty helpful here. Notably, all 3 of these cards play really nicely with Rock of the Vanquisher because Rock points down. Security Dragon only works if it's co-linked, so you need Rock for this. But for Phoenix and Cerberus, it actually also gives you a draw on top of their pop effects, which is really nice and surprisingly easy to trigger in this deck. Lastly, Sky Striker Ace Azalea. I didn't actually make this card over the weekend. I do still want to keep it in because I think it is an incredible card, especially having the potential ability to remove 2 cards for 1 is really nice. And it's just super easy to make in this deck. We're playing a ton of dark monsters. We got the Bestials, we got Borgers, we got Mad Loves. We have a lot of ways to go into this pretty comfortably. So I like it. I think we're going to keep it because it just has a ton of utility for sure. Now, over to the Xyz cards, and this is where we get into some spice. So we have the number 41, Baguska the Terribly Tired Tapir. We have the Experly Noir, yeah, we're getting into some interesting stuff now. The Kashtira Arise Heart, and the copies of Spriggans, Merrymaker, and Gigantic Champion Sargas. So all 5 of these cards exist to facilitate you being able to get into one of your 2 copies of Zeus. So, a couple of different ways we can kind of approach this. Baguska, really interesting effect a lot of people don't really think about. Baguska's attack position effect prevents it from being destroyed by card effects. So if you can ever get Baguska out, you can usually just go battle phase, swing into any defense monster or direct, just punch into something, and you're guaranteed to get Zeus off because you it won't be destroyed until you put Zeus overlay in it. If they try to destroy Zeus at that point, unless they're negating its summon, you get to chain Zeus and still wipe the board. Noir actually came up a lot. So Noir's actually generic. You only need 2 level 7s to summon this card, and Borger's actually a level 7. It's surprisingly easy to get this card out. Came up a couple times, used its removal effect, pushed for battle phase and made Zeus over top of it. Same idea. These are all great ways to set up our Zeus. Kashtira Rise Heart. This is mostly here for Kashtira, Triple Tactics, Talons, shenanigans. So, you know, your opponent activates Shangri-Ira in their standby phase. You steal one of their monsters. You overlay a Rise Heart on, depending on how many materials you've taken from that monster. Maybe you get to use its banish effect, go combat, overlay for Zeus, that kind of stuff. And lastly, so this is going to require a bit more of an additional explanation. So we're finally into kind of our cool combo play for the deck here. So how this setup works. So Spriggan's Merrymaker is a generic Xyz that only needs 2 level 4 monsters. We already talked about that earlier. Super easy to get these cards into rotation in this deck. You can immediately rank up into Gigantic Champion Sargass over top of Merrymaker, and for no cost at all, no material detachment, you can search your Therion King Regulus, search your Omni Negate directly from the deck for free. Then you go combat. Sargass is a very respectable 2800 attack, which is pretty nice. Go combat, punch into something, overlay for Zeus, and guess what? You've got 2 level 4 monsters underneath your Merrymaker, which is also underneath your Sargass. You overlay for Zeus, and you have a 2 activation Zeus that also just searched you an Omni Negate. Maybe you immediately use its effect, and guess what? You can determine what materials you want to detach from your Zeus when you use the effect. So maybe you put one of your starters for like a continue, and you put your Merrymaker or your Sargass in the grave, and guess what? Merrymaker and Sargass are both machine monsters. So that right away sets you up for being able to use your Therion King Regulus effect, because it targets a machine monster in grave, special summons itself and attaches, and then can be an Omni Negate. So for your opponent's next turn, you have a Zeus activation protected by an Omni Negate. Super powerful setup, super powerful effect. I love it. I think it's really, really strong. Lastly, we're playing one Synchro actually, the one of Chaos Angel, because this one doesn't need you to have tuners, it just needs you to have light and dark monsters. And guess what? In this deck, we have a pretty easy way to set it up actually. All we need is any one of our Bestials, which we're usually special summoning, and our Mad Love, which we usually get into rotation anyway. So having access to a banish that also protects our cards, it's pretty nice, pretty powerful cards. So we're playing a lot of good generics that just get us easy access into our extra deck tools. And lastly, we are on to the side deck. So some of this should be pretty standard at this point. We're playing 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. We're actually playing 3 copies of Evenly Matched, 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone, and the one of Harpy's Feather Duster. Like I said, a lot of this should be pretty standard stuff. This is mostly just certain matchups you have to play Drolls. So decks like Math Mech, really hurts Cyber's decks in general, Marine Cess, you know, some of these rogue matchups that just really pop off way too much if you don't keep them in check and keep them from drawing way too many cards. All the rest of this obviously serves just one purpose, and that's to deal with back row decks. So these are our answers to Labyrinth. Cosmic, obviously great card, banishes the card so they can't keep recycling it using its graveyard effects. Harpies, just a blowout for back row. Evenly Matched, blowout for boards in general. So when we know we're going second, we have some great tools to access to help us play through what our opponent can set up. Now, didn't see much of those cards in the tournament over the weekend, but cards I did see a lot of were our 2 copies of Dimension Barrier and 2 copies of Anti-Spell Fragrance. So in that Tearlaments matchup I mentioned, I was able to resolve both Dimensional Barrier and Anti-Spell Fragrance against them on a single turn. And let me just say, a Tearlaments player with no spell cards and no fusions doesn't do too much. We definitely walked away with that one pretty comfortably. So these are great cards. I keep them in for certain matchups anyway. D-Barrier is just a great card to help us through things like Branded, help us with some rogue matchups, rituals, pendulums, those kinds of things. Came up versus Sword Soul at least once over the weekend, so a really great card for just utility there for floodgating when we know we're going to be going first. Anti-spell, again, there are certain matchups that just can't compete without access to their spell cards. Kashtira is actually a pretty good one for that, at least for forcing them to go through the battle phase to clear this card, which sometimes, again, in this deck, we just need to survive a lot of the time, so that helps. It's also good against decks like Sky Strikers and other kind of rogue matchups that are wandering around as well. So these cards overperformed. I'll absolutely be keeping these in for sure. And lastly, onto our final two cards for the deck profile, and these were two that pulled their weight quite a lot and definitely may stand out as a bit of a surprise. 2 copies of Token Collector. So fun fact about my locals, there's actually a ton of people who play Sword Soul at my locals. It's a great deck. It's very easy to play, very consistent, has, you know, pretty strong combo lines. I know with the recent unbanning of Danglong, there's actually some new, very strong play lines that can actually set you up with Omni-Negate counter traps to help play around some of these crazy blowout cards that a lot of people are playing. So it's a really great deck. It's really evolved with the newest ban list, and I do think that is a great deck for new players, and indeed, I ran into a new player playing this over the weekend. But, so we get into Game 2, Game 1, and we finish siding. I put both of these in. We shuffle our decks, cut our decks, good luck, have fun, draw our opening hand, and here I am going second, and what do I see in my opening hand? But both of my copies of Token Collector. So, needless to say, the new player found out how Token Collector worked versus Sword Soul when they normal summoned Moye, revealed their worm monster, and summoned their token, and unfortunately they weren't able to play past that point because Token Collector is honestly one of the most annoying counter cards I think I've seen in just about any matchup against any deck. The fact that it can keep coming back from the graveyard even if you've cleared it already is super annoying and problematic for Sword Soul to deal with. So we had that one on the field, cleared them, stopped their turn. I think they actually cleared it afterwards, but it was in grave and we still had one in hand. There was no way they were getting out of it. Went through our normal play line. We had a great draw that time, by the way. We opened both of these and we opened full combo, so we went through, were able to clear that matchup. After the fact, I showed them that we opened both and that we had only sided in the 2. And it was actually interesting. I had a number of people come over to me and ask after the fact when they saw what happened with that game, why are you putting this card in your side deck? Like, what's the point of playing this? This card isn't representative of the metagame anymore. And really interesting point about this, guys. If you're going out there and you're taking a look at some deck profiles like this one and you're finding that you're not having a lot of success with it, try to think about when you're putting together, especially things like your side deck, what your local meta is. You know, not every tournament store is going to have 10 people playing Kashtira, right? Not every tournament store is going to have 10 people playing Dark Magician and Blue Eyes decks. So sometimes you need to think about what's going on nearest you and how you interact and engage in card games with the people that you're going to be playing with. And if your results aren't matching up to the results of what some of the pros or some of the deck profiles are that you're looking at, think about what the people around you are playing and think about how better to adjust and adapt your card choices to what they are playing as opposed to what you're seeing online. Just a little bit of feedback. I know a lot of people don't really do a lot of that. I know some people who just kind of one-to-one net deck and go from there, but give it a shot, think about it, and give it a try. I mean, worst case scenario, you know, you get the same results if you're not getting good results from before. So I think it's worth trying, and for me at the tournament over this weekend, this choice definitely pulled its weight, for sure. So that is going to be it for the Vanquish Soul deck profile today, guys. I'm so happy I was able to share this one with you. I think this is an incredibly cool deck. We are going to keep working on building it out. We are going to keep on working on getting together all of our super awesome high rarity versions of our cards. We got our Mad Loves, for sure. We got our Raisin. And lastly, we have our Stake Your Soul. So we're working on it. We're getting there. I think this deck is going to look super cool when it's all said and done. Really excited for the Rarity Collection in November. I think that's going to add a ton to this deck. I'm super excited to keep on playing, keep on adapting and building, and hopefully we'll come back to you guys with even better results in the future. But for now, that is going to be it for me, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you like this, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell for more awesome content like this, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye!